With today's illegal, unconstitutional, and partisan impeachment, the do-nothing Democrats, and they are do-nothing, all they want to do is focus on this, what they could be doing, are declaring their deep hatred and disdain for the American voter.
President Trump trashing House Democrats at a Michigan rally 2 weeks ago on the very night he was impeached. I'm Carol Jenkins, filling in for Sam Roberts. Welcome to the New York Times Close-Up and Happy New Year. Much more on politics in a moment. Also on our agenda, the Equal Rights Amendment needs to be ratified by just one more state before it can become a part of the Constitution. What would be the impact if that happens? And more states are enacting severe restrictions on abortion. How will the battle over reproductive rights play out in 2020? We'll talk about the critical year coming up for American women. But we begin with the start of a red-hot political year. We don't know the official timing or the format of President Trump's impeachment trial yet, but we do know it's almost certain he'll be acquitted by a Republican Senate. What will be the political fallout from impeachment? Will it fire up the bases of both parties and pump up voter turnout? Or, given the speed of the news cycle and the nonstop flow of Trump controversies, will impeachment fade as a hot-button issue soon after the trial ends? Meanwhile, the Democratic primary race gets very real in just a few weeks. The Iowa caucuses are February 3rd. The New Hampshire primary is February 11th. So what is the state of play among Democrats? Let's talk politics with Mara Gay, a member of the New York Times editorial board, and Dr. Heath Brown, a professor here at CUNY. Thank you both so much for being here. Look, I'm amazed, let me tell you, of the many things I could be amazed at. The one is that we have three women, Nancy Pelosi, Lisa Murkowski, and Susan Collins, who are like dominating the news. Nancy Pelosi, of course, because she has yet to turn over those impeachment articles. Lisa Murkowski for saying, oh, I'm a little bothered by, what Senator McConnell is doing in acting so in step with the White House. And then, of course, we never know what Susan Collins is going to do, right? So we're all, what have you thought about that, the fact that we have these three women who are in positions of power, Mar?
I don't know that I put them together always. I think that Susan Collins has not shown up for women in the United States. She has another opportunity to do so by really urging her colleagues and forcing them on the Republican side to take the charges, the indictment really, against the president seriously. I think the country only really needs a handful of Republican senators in order to conduct a process that would be as serious as is required here. And, Susan Collins has an opportunity to really, show that she's a serious member.
So many people smarting from the Kavanaugh vote.
The Kavanaugh vote, she's also quite in trouble at home. She may lose her seat, and this is a chance to prevent that.
Right. Well, talk about Nancy Pelosi and her holding back the articles, which, to so many people seems like, isn't that such a smart move? But how long can she hold them back? What's your thought?
I don't think she can hold them back for that long, and probably doesn't have any intention to. I think the gamesmanship here is partially to goat the president to doing the things that he has classically done, which is to always undermine his own goals. And so I think that she's very, very smart and knows that this has an ability to do that. And your other question about Lisa Murkowski, I think one of the things to me is the very, very low bar that we've set for members of the Senate for basic decency. The things that she has said are just the matter-of-fact things that any member of the Senate should be saying about a process that seems pretty clear should take place. What ultimately transpires is a different thing.
Right.
That's not what she's asking. And so we've set sort of a very low bar, and she's stepped over it. But
I know it's so, just to be uncomfortable is like, oh, she said she's uncomfortable.
Right.
But that is the question. Once it gets to the Senate, there are those who are saying that it's a done deal, it's quick, it's over with, and we move along to the next news story.
Yeah, it's never a done deal with Donald Trump. I think that you're absolutely right that Senator McConnell has set things up in a way that this shouldn't last very long and should end up exactly where we think it's going to. But Donald Trump has a way of sort of gumming things up, even when it doesn't benefit him. So I suspect that there are things to come from the president that's going to make this much, much more interesting than it's looking right now.
Well, he had Rudy Giuliani as a guest at wherever they were, in the sun at the golf course, and Rudy,
Right.
of course, is giving interviews. Mark, tell me, what is Rudy Giuliani up to? What's the story?
Well, the question that I have for Rudy Giuliani is, who is really paying your bills? Because he's made it very clear that the president,
Right.
that he's working for the president for free. And so Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor, is making quite a few trips to Ukraine. He is doing business and has done business with some very shady characters, some of whom are behind bars as we speak. So I would like to know who's paying his bills and, what, if any, conflict of interest there is for the president in that situation. It's kind of, I think, incredible, frankly, that someone who is under investigation is continuing to flout democracy and the rule of law. I mean, it just suggests a certain impunity, and I think that's all the more reason that the Democrats were right in the House to go ahead and impeach the president, because there have to be some consequences for this behavior.
Yeah, well, I think you and Attorney General Letitia James are interested in exactly that thing. Who is paying his bill? Let's talk a little bit about how we have a couple of things that have happened on the international scene. While all of this impeachment and the tweets and all of that's going on, we have world crises in 2, 3, or more countries. Who do you think is watching all of that? Do you have any idea who's in charge there?
Well, Russia's enjoying the show. That's clear. I think Vladimir Putin is really the only winner in 2019. If you look at the course of world events, the challenges faced by democracy in China, in Russia, in the United States, in Venezuela, in Brazil, the list goes on, are immense. And I think that, frankly, the one undercurrent that you see is the extreme income inequality in all of these countries. And so I think if we don't come together to address that, along with climate change, frankly, we're going to see more democracies collapsing.
Yeah, Heath, the president always talks about the economy, as do many people, especially investors, right, who say stock market investors who are profiting and have profited mightily. But, the middle class is falling behind. The working class is rising in numbers. We're almost becoming, or have been for some time, that same kind of society of unequal status.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think the two things that brings those two things together really is one of the things that's happening really in the background of this administration, which is the hollowing out of much of the federal bureaucracy through the sheer frustration of many career bureaucrats. And we see every day stories of people who have said, it's enough, I've had enough. Scientists who've worked for decades in the most non-political fashion, essentially pushed out for trying to pursue the basic good governance that they have for decades, Republican, Democrats, presidents alike. They've been pushed out and often replaced by often the very people that rules have been set up to prevent from coming in and doing the kinds of things that you're describing. Former lobbyists have a stake in the kinds of outcomes that you're just describing now. And so that's something that happens in the background that we don't typically see, but is as harmful as all of the tweets and all of the things that we see sort of as public. That's really long-term and very, very worrisome.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the Democratic candidates. Julian Castro dropping out of the race, a debate stage that will have no people of black and brown at any rate. Andrew Yang will still be there. What's your thought about that, the fact that we now went from having the most diverse presidential camp group launched to now whittling down to no participation?
I think it's disappointing. I think it suggests a couple of things. One issue is that there's a large base of Democratic voters, black voters, particularly in the South, who appear to be most comfortable with Joe Biden. That has driven fundraising in this race. And I think my guess is that part of the reason is because given the occupant of the White House and how much he's embraced whiteness, frankly, that they believe that only another white man can actually beat Donald Trump. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do think that is a sentiment felt by some Democratic voters that's driving this. The other reality is that when you look across the country in state and local offices, you don't see a deep pipeline of talent. And that's not to say that there aren't people of color who are talented in politics. Sure. There are, right. But it is very difficult. We don't have a lot of black governors. We don't have a lot of Hispanic governors. So that's something to look at for the Democratic Party down the line.
Heath, here.
It feels like we've made this process much more democratic, small d democratic, easier for candidates who don't have large, deep pockets to enter the race. And at the early stage, that's probably true. But I think what a number of these recent dropouts have indicated is it's still very, very difficult. And either you have an enormous grassroots operation that goes back for years and years, like Bernie Sanders, or you're able to self-fund in a way. And outside of that, it's really very difficult to get the traction to maintain the momentum to stay in the race. And I think Juliana Castro is a perfect example of that, somebody who has all of those governance skills and abilities, and ultimately wasn't able to translate that to support.
Speaking of deep pockets, Mike Bloomberg is making actually an impression. Some people are coming to his side. I see a lot of action, and I've looked at some of those commercials where he spends most of his time trashing Trump, which for Democrats it seems not to be a bad thing. I don't know, but I mean, you were saying that he's opened an office in the Virgin Islands. What's the Tell me about that.
Well, he has the former mayor has a very narrow but different pathway to victory in mind. And, listen, I don't think that Bloomberg's presence in the race is a bad thing. I actually happen to really enjoy his ads. I think that he attracts a certain kind of voter who admires entrepreneurship. And there's really nothing wrong with that, unlike the current president. Mayor Bloomberg is a self-made billionaire. And so some are attracted to that, that's fine. Bloomberg hopes that he can play very strongly in the Super Tuesday states. He may do that. I think it's a long shot, but anything is possible right now. It's still very early.
Do you think he can outrun stop and frisk, though? I don't know how if that's going to stop him in his tracks.
Yeah.
Along the way.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever really going to get to that, because I think that he's not going to be able to get the traction with voters to really get to the point where people are truly evaluating his campaign. It seems like there's two paths that the Democrats have. One is the path taken by Elizabeth Warren, which is sort of the idea, policy-centered approach, and then there's a opposed Donald Trump, and that's essentially what Joe Biden is doing. What I think, and I think what the evidence suggests, is that Democrats don't typically win on anger. Republicans have won on anger, but I think Democrats tend not to be as successful on anger. And so I think the candidate who is able not to get into that as the basis for their campaign is going to be the most successful. But with Donald Trump in the White House, it's hard to imagine how you actually do that. And so I think that's one of the paradoxes that many of these candidates are facing.
Right. And Mara, I know you have, turning locally, an editorial in the New York Times
yes.
today, but just very briefly, because I'm
sure.
getting it cute.
So, we've seen, unfortunately, a horrific spate of anti-Semitic attacks here in New York and in the region. So there's a march this Sunday to stand in solidarity with our Jewish neighbors. And it'd be great. It's going to be 11 a.m. on Sunday, meeting at Foley Square, just north of City Hall, marching across the Brooklyn Bridge. And it's a great opportunity to stand up against hate.
Okay. Speaking of standing up against hate and anger, thank you both so much, Mara.
Thank you.
Dr. Heath Brown, thank you very much. We will be right back. Up next, abortion rights and the Equal Rights Amendment, two small matters. We'll talk about the crucial year ahead for women in America.
By the end of this century, I hope this nation will be a place where men and women can freely choose their life's work without restrictions and without ridicule.
Former First Lady Betty Ford speaking out in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment in 1975. Yes, I said 1975. Congress approved the E.R.A. in 1972. The first version of the amendment was actually introduced way back in 1923. The E.R.A. states, quote, "Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." That's it. Pretty simple. So why isn't the E.R.A. a part of the Constitution yet? What are the implications if this is the year it finally becomes the 28th Amendment? Yes. Meanwhile, states across the South and the Midwest passed dozens of restrictions on abortion last year, some virtually banning the procedure. The Supreme Court will hear a major case on the issue in March. Will abortion rights be restricted or protected in 2020? Let's talk about it all with starting with the E.R.A. Lauren Kelly is a member of the New York Times editorial board. She focuses on women and reproductive rights, and Jamia Wilson is the publisher of the Feminist Press here at CUNY. Thank you both so much for being here. And let me just start by way of saying that, I know a little bit about the E.R.A. because I run the E.R.A. Coalition. Jamia is on our advisory council, and Lauren knows more than we all do because you keep us informed about it. Can you tell us, from your perspective, where do you see the Equal Rights Amendment right now?
Sure. I mean, I absolutely take my cues and my, reporting from the work on the ground, which you two have been so involved in. And thank you for that. I think what's happening right now is really exciting. As you said, this fight has been a century in the making. And then, up until recent years, there hadn't been movement since 1982. So this is a long fight, and we're just at this precipice where it looks very much like Virginia might be the 38th critical state to ratify the E.R.A. It's a really big deal. For those who don't know, you need 38 states to ratify a constitutional amendment. So that's going to be a huge deal. I mean, it sure seems like they're set up to do that. This is a situation where elections mattered, local elections mattered. The makeup of the legislature in Virginia changed such that it has made this possible. So that's going to be really exciting to see.
Right. Well, Jamia, we've talked about this. The interesting thing that many people don't know is that 5 of the legislators who are introducing the bill in January are women of color. 4 Black women and 1 Latina, Afro-Latina, she describes herself, which is really sort of poetic justice, as many people say, for Virginia, which was slow to move on a lot of historical things. Your thoughts about the fact that Black women, Latina women, women of color are engaged in this fight?
I'm really excited that the work that you're doing and the work that these amazing legislators are doing is really uplifting women of color's role in leadership in the Equal Rights Amendment fight since the very beginning, and also kind of undoing some of the wrongs that happened in the very beginning in terms of women who were involved in the suffrage movement and women who were involved in the early conversations not being uplifted by the media, and course correcting the conversation to show that the women whose communities are on the front lines of all of the different policies that are dangerous to our communities that would be protected by the E.R.A. are actually the ones who need to be at the forefront of leading this change, because we know firsthand about how our communities are impacted when we don't have constitutional equality. And I think that it's really important that our voices are heard, but also that we're represented as a part of the change, because we've been doing the work for so long, and now is our time to be seen as a part of that fabric.
Right. I took my granddaughter to the Portrait Gallery's exhibition on the vote, and it was so interesting to see that when you interpret things more intersectionally, for instance, Black women were doing things that wouldn't be labeled as vote, but would be labeled as, club work and, church work. And that was still the same work that was leading to the women's vote and to equality. Lauren, we have a couple of huge hurdles. There is the time limit.
There is, yeah. There are a couple of really big issues. There are really plausible legal arguments that those can be resolved. one big step is going to be dealing with the time limit. So there was an original, I think it was originally a 1972 time limit for the states to ratify, and then it became 1982. We obviously have passed that deadline by some number of years. I think that deadline was actually a few weeks before I was born. So I've lived my entire lifetime without that deadline having passed. So that's going to be something to address. This is, once again, not to keep beating this drum, but elections matter. I think the makeup of the Senate come the November election is going to matter a lot here. There's a lot of work, as you know, being done legislatively.
We have the votes. Yeah, we have the votes in the House of Representatives.
Sure.
The judiciary voted it out 21-11.
Right, and this is a bill to
remove
totally
remove the time limit, and so we're just waiting for a full floor vote from Speaker Pelosi. And as you point out, the Senate is a much more complicated. Although Senator Ben Cardin and Lisa Murkowski have a bipartisan bill that's adding a little bit more Democratic than Republican senators for sure at this moment. But we there's that, and there's also the rescissions, states that have tried to take back their vote.
Sure. So there's a handful of states, as you said, who have sort of unratified, if you will. They've since they ratified the E.R.A, they have passed laws to take back that ratification. Or try to. The thing is, there's really nothing in the Constitution that says that unratifying is a thing. So it's not clear that counts, but again, there will be legal fights about all of this.
Right.
Sure.
No, we've got many years. I think it will go straight to the Supreme Court.
It very well may. Which again, elections matter. It matters who ends up on the Supreme Court.
Right. Well, speaking of women's rights, I know that you have this magnificent, multiply layered exploration of what has happened to reproductive rights in the Times, and it's a beautiful piece. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. So this was a special section that the New York Times editorial board, which I'm on, produced, and it's called A Woman's Rights. And it's really about personhood and this concept that fetal personhood has sort of trumped the rights of the women who are carrying those fetuses.
So now the fetus is, in some places, more important than the woman,
That's right.
That's
right. So we've seen that happen over the years. There's lots of people who have sort of raised the alarm bells about this for years and years. But we're sort of seeing this sort of long game come to fruition now. We're seeing this sort of far right wing of the anti-abortion movement really get some wins. You mentioned in your intro that there were a lot of very serious abortion bans that were passed and considered in 2019. Those, they didn't come out of nowhere. They had sort of existed before, but they had never been politically viable in the way that they were in 2019. It was pretty stunning to see, actually. I think there was a sense in the spring when Georgia, Alabama, and other states were considering these laws that, wow, this feels really intense. I heard a lot of people speaking out and saying, what on earth is happening? How did we get here? And I just wanted to assure people it feels really intense because it is really intense. This really is wild in the history of the anti-abortion movement.
There are those who say that part of what's going on, the evangelical, the Trump administration, and that somehow his immigration policies are connected to the abortion stance, and all of it to keep America white again. So, Jamia, do you want to talk a little bit about that, where we're going with this purging of people of color?
So much of this is rooted in maintaining a dominant culture that serves a white majority and a white patriarchal majority, a white male majority of people with high incomes. And if you think about people and labor and wanting to make sure that you have a second class of people that you can control the reproduction of in order to continue to have low-wage work done to continue to keep you at the top, this very much serves the model of domination that Donald Trump has used within his corporations, but also in terms of what he espouses and what he uses as a rhetorical device to inspire his base. I think that What concerns me the most is that a lot of people aren't connecting the dots between why the immigration fight is connected intrinsically with reproductive justice fights, or why that fight is connected to fights around environmental justice. And I think that's by design. I think that one of the most important moments I had happened right here at CUNY when I was teaching at John Jay, and I had students who asked me why I was asking them to look into immigration rights as it related to reproductive justice, that those were two different issues and they didn't understand why those conversations needed to be connected. And so I said, okay, let's talk about what it means when a woman is at the border and her children are taken from her against her will. What does it mean if you can't get fair access to contraception? What does it mean if you cross the border and you are pregnant? What does it mean if you are in a state where they can criminalize you for having mental health issues or having an abortion?
Yeah, so all of those things, and they finally understood it, and we only have a little bit of time left, Lauren, but your reporting validates this connection, this.
Sure. I mean, I think everything Jamia says is correct. There is a sort of broad philosophy in this administration that is all of a piece. I think it's patriarchal, it is anti-woman, it's anti-people of color, and I think we certainly see all of that come out in the abortion fight and immigration.
Yeah, well, we hope you will come back. It's a conversation that absolutely needs to be continued. Jamia Wilson and Lauren Kelly, thank you so much for being here today. I'm Carol Jenkins, and thanks for watching New York Times Close Up.